Right. Since we're still on this topic of an enterprise, uh, just as we're thinking about a few things as well, uh, other things that would likely not be a part of an enterprise is certain instances where you basically have like different branches. So based on the makeup of how those branches have been set up, in terms of like their accounting systems, and in terms of like the separation of their identities as to whether they could be separated from each other, and in terms of their locations and so forth as well, depending on the makeup of such branches. So which is why we'd rather say certain branches would likely not be an enterprise as such, because if you have like one accounting system and so forth, you can't be in these transactions between branch A and branch B where these branches cannot be separately identifiable from each other. In one such a situation, you'd likely not have an enterprise, because that would be like you're transacting with yourself. There would likely not be a second party, because you are basically assumed to be transacting with yourself. So in that instance, there would not be an enterprise, because there is no exchange between two parties. For such a VAT transaction to basically arise, we have discussed in how you likely need to have like two parties who are diametrically different from each other to have to transact with each other. So certain branches likely not satisfying the definition of an enterprise as well. We also spoke about how commercial accommodation is different in terms of the voluntary registration amount of the 50,000 rands, which could also be an exercisable option for people that want to register as VAT vendors, even though they do not have the threshold amount in terms of their turnover, so far as the 1 million rands threshold is concerned, exclusive of the VAT portion. So in other situations that we spoke, you do have the option of being a voluntary VAT vendor, and you can voluntarily register if you do happen to have a turnover of more than 50,000 rands, exclusive of the VAT amount. And in that situation, if you so wish to register, you can register. Whereas if you're running a commercial accommodation, right? If you have commercial accommodation like your hotel or your B&B, for instance, this would deem it to be commercial accommodation. The voluntary registration for commercial accommodation is not 50,000 rands, but rather 120,000 rands. So if you do not have turnover of 120,000 exclusive of the VAT portion, and you want to register as a VAT vendor, and you are in the commercial accommodation space, you will likely not be allowed to register for that, because you are compelled to have more than, or to have 120,000 or more than 120,000 to qualify for the voluntary registration, basically, as we basically stated it here. So you can have maybe 70,000 rands, that would mean you don't qualify. You can have 50,000 rands, you still don't qualify. But if you have 120,000 rands, then you likely qualify for the voluntary registration, so far as being a commercial accommodation VAT vendor. Right, so got that out of the way. So remember, in the portion of the description of an enterprise where we spoke about having an activity or an enterprise which is carried on a continuous basis or regularly, and you obviously have to be located within South Africa by any person in the course of furtherance of a supply of goods or services for a consideration, whether for profit or loss. So that special word consideration comes up. So now we need to just be careful of what does consideration entail. What qualifies as being consideration? Consideration, if it's a transaction between two parties, one supplies oranges, just as we spoke about that example, for a value of money, let's say 10 rand a bag. So oranges in this regard is a good, and 10 rands from this person over here is money amount. So this money amount constitutes it being consideration. So the money value is basically said to be consideration. So what are we saying? If we've got two parties who are basically exchanging a good for a service, a good for money. In this instance, this person 1 is transferring oranges to person 2 for 10 rands in return of him giving him a bag of oranges. Therefore, he gets 10 rands in return. So therefore, in this situation, we've got consideration which is measured by money value in the form of 10 rands. So 10 rands in this regard would be our consideration. If we're to take the same situation and say oranges, but person 2 now doesn't pay in a form of money, he pays in a form of what? Like in a form of doing a page of bookkeeping for this person doing oranges. So let's say a page of bookkeeping for this person who has bookkeeping skills, person 2, is 10 rands on any regular basis. So therefore the service of him giving bookkeeping is 10 rands. Right? So in this instance, what is our consideration? Our consideration is measured in the manner in which the bookkeeping services are basically a form of payment for getting the oranges. So this bookkeeping service would be consideration in our example where we do not have money. And bookkeeping services of 10 rands, let's say this is likely the market value of bookkeeping services, the market value of bookkeeping services in the bookkeeping industry, basically. So you just need to be very wary of such a situation. Whereas, if you're giving your cousin a bag of oranges for free, in this situation there is no consideration. And if there's no consideration, therefore there cannot be VAT. Why? No VAT. Why is there no VAT? Because there is no consideration. Because there's no consideration. Therefore it's not an enterprise. Therefore it's not a taxable transaction. And these are all the situations that you constantly have to be asking yourself about. Like, where are we in the stream of time, and where are we in terms of an enterprise, and in terms of all those factors that are making up that definition of an enterprise, in harmony with the main definition of having taxable supplies between a vendor and a vendor, and obviously having to be either a good or a service which is supplied for a consideration. So just be very mindful of that. So this is basically what we basically mean by consideration, and this should basically just be a clear enough example for you to just trigger the questions of what to look out for in terms of likely being tricked in a question.